Welcome to Outrage Overload, a science podcast about outrage and lowering the temperature.
Probably for all of us, we probably had to overcome that just initial, I'm talking to somebody new.
That was a Civics Corps student, a participant in a unique dialogue initiative that's helping young people build the skills and confidence to talk across divides.
I know personally for me, even though I did this last year, just thinking that I didn't want to sound young or dumb or like I didn't know what I was talking about. But at the same time, I also really didn't want to get onto this meeting and not have something to say. So kind of torn between that, not wanting to ramble, but also not wanting to just sit there in silence. We all are really busy people. So just making that time, just kind of setting aside that, all right, this is important. We've set time to do this, and let's just relax and have this conversation. So I think that's one thing that I personally overcame a little bit.
I'm your host, David Beckmeyer, and today on the Outrage Overload podcast, we're joined by the creator of this thoughtful civic learning program.
Hi, I'm June Klees. I am a social behavioral science and humanities educator at Bay College in Escanaba, Michigan, and I am deeply involved with the dialogue across difference work in the United States, and specifically locally with an organization I'm partnered with called Waging Dialogue, where we run the Civics Corps.
Dr. June Klees is helping train a new generation of citizen professionals using an approach grounded in neuroscience and historical thinking. The program uses something she calls intergenerational dyad partnering, pairing students with conversation partners from different age groups for sustained, intentional dialogue. So when you hear the students talking about their partner in the clips that follow, they're referring to that dialogue partner, someone intentionally different from them in age, background, or worldview. We'll hear from June Klees about waging dialogue and from students reflecting on their experience in this program, how it challenged their assumptions and stretched their comfort zones. Let's hear all about it right now. So, June Klees, welcome to the show. Thank
you so much. Happy to be here.
I'm really glad you're able to make this time, and I'm really excited about this project you're working on. So, tell us a little bit about waging dialogue, the method, and how it's rooted in neuroscience, and I think you also talk about historical practice.
So to kind of give you a little context for that, the partnership with Waging Dialogue happened as a result of connecting in through the Listen First Coalition, which folks who have heard of the Listen First Project would know about those efforts. And but before we met, Matt Pagatti, Dr. Alice Mayer, who are from the Waging Dialogue, which has a parent organization called Changing Our Consciousness that Alice had founded. There was a group of historians and community college professionals that I kind of gathered together, and we were working on some projects around turning down the heat in American political discourse. And as we talked about that, we realized we wanted to get something going for community college students, which is the Civics Corps. And so we developed out a model for getting students engaged specifically in intergenerational dialogue. Now that comes from our backgrounds as historians, understanding that often political divisions can be downstream from generational divisions. And getting people talking again intergenerationally is kind of like we call a soft land into working on developing out one's dialogue skills and bridging skills. It's different than saying jumping right into some of the hot topics that often, when you think about bridging, often that go towards like immigration or abortion. So it allows particularly students who may not have a lot of confidence or experience to warm up to the idea of having potentially challenging conversations around difference, but doing it in a way that allows for them to see context better. And that's where the intergenerationality comes in. And the goal with all of this is very specific in terms of this model, is to help pre-professional students get some experience doing this kind of stuff before they step out into these professional environments that they may not really be ready for the level, given the level of toxic, politics in our society at this time, necessarily be ready for that kind of the grit that it takes to be able to, in as a nonpartisan professional, right, being able to interface with people and when these difficult conversations, which they will come up, especially in careers tied to criminal justice, teaching, social work, nursing, even on to degree business and customer service, where students normally you don't really get a lot of those experiences until later. And we feel in our times it's better for students. This is a community college, by the way, specific model. It's better for students to get those experiences sooner than later. And we do it in a context of service. We do it in the context of a degree of play, and then also allow for our students to get professional resume building credentials as they do this work.
Yeah, that's great. And we are definitely going to talk about as many of those things as we can.
That's an overview.
Let's hear from Chloe.
What I realized about myself was that I was heavily biased towards religious people. I had my own set thoughts of how they act and how they behave and what they think, and even like to the way they vote. And I thought it's like this, 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 and this, and that can't change. But then we talked about like other stuff that we support and stuff, and a lot of the stuff we support the same things. So I'm like, well, then I guess not every religious person believes it like this, and they do have their own beliefs. They do have their own belief system and set beliefs. So that was really what I learned about myself.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about how that describes or speaks to some of the specific skills the students are learning.
So a lot of what we encourage students to relax into is their own sense of curiosity. And again, by partnering with people of different generations and focusing in on and asking them as they're working within this dyad pair, because it's a dyad, you go through this process, it's a two-step thing. In focusing in around that to get themselves into that curiosity mindset that helps them open up, challenge their assumptions, that helps them challenge their assumptions and get away from some of those cookie cutter mindsets. Some of this is understanding that at ages, a relative age range that we're dealing with in terms of most of the students that would participate in the Civics Corps would be potentially as young as like 17 going up to the early 20s. And what is happening in those years for young adults is a layering of identity formation, and in particular their civic identities, which we don't talk enough about with young people, I think, in general, not only just to these toxic times that we're in, but with the decline in civics education, where you're reflecting on your sense of civic self, leaning into curiosity and leaning into that I need to take broader perspectives becomes part of how we're encouraging students to sort of open up. And the process really is focused not as much really on the dialogue piece as it is the listening piece. So it's an opportunity, first and foremost, for them to sit, listen, and lean into questions that allow them to lead from curiosity and challenge assumptions. Then that process reverses. Their partner is to listen to them, which then gives them, of course, that opportunity to find their voice and to express, things somewhat diplomatically to their views.
Yeah, so you mentioned that the program that you put together is specific for community colleges, and I'm like the biggest fan of community colleges. I mean, I think community college literally, or at least, very much saved my life. So what's special about applying this learning? Why'd you pick community colleges?
Well, I'm a community college professional and have been my whole career. Absolutely love the mission of community colleges. And I think, and there's wonderful stuff, of course, being done at four-year institutions, and don't want to dismiss that. But a lot of times, a lot of the designs in the products that they often will want to bring into a campus, et cetera, they're not realistic to the lifestyle of our community college students. They're often working. Sometimes they're caretaking younger, siblings or even their aging grandparents, whatever it might be. They're everybody's lives are complex, but when you look at the intersection of what goes on in your average community college student, there's a lot happening that they're managing. So a big element of this is to lean into getting them right into the praxis, right into practical application and seeing the connections between their everyday life, but particularly with that, again, that career focused aim. A lot of our students are 2-year degree students. So this will be the end of their academic journey, at least for the time being, right? And so we're trying to empower them, as I mentioned earlier than later in their academic journey, and to get them becoming more self-reflective thinkers earlier and in ways that fit their lifestyles. So our goal is we have a year-round model, and I can talk more specifically about what we do in that year later, but we have this year model, but even within that year, a student can do one semester or another and still get benefit from this experience.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. So you mentioned earlier about sort of nervous system regulation aspects. So let's hear from Alyssa about that.
For me, it was when he started to talk about his point of view and his standing as far as politics go. I started to get really sweaty and shaky and nervous because I've had really bad experiences talking with somebody over politics. And honestly, hearing what he had to say and how understanding he was and how gentle he was about it was really reassuring. And also just talking to myself in my head, letting me know that, hey, this is fine. We're in a public space. Nothing is going to happen here. I'm not in danger. You got this. Kind of just brought me back to a level head, and planting my feet on the floor and getting myself grounded really helped as well.
Yeah, and that makes me think about how, some of the how neuroscience informs some of this, but maybe you have some other thoughts on this general idea of learning these self-regulation practices.
Yeah, it really is. This is where the neuroscience becomes incredibly powerful. And you don't have to get heavy into the technology or the terminology. You don't have to, hit them over the head with it multiple times. I think sometimes when we, especially older adults, when we tend to speak about these kinds of things with younger people, there's sort of an assumption that they're not going to get it intuitively. They do. Oh boy, do they get it into. And so you can lean into a lot of prior background knowledge and experience. The thing is that you want to pinpoint it. You want to synthesize it very clearly for them. And so we talk about in the curriculum that before the civic diplomacy part of our training, we talk about the basics of the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn instincts. And then we talk about, well, what does that look like physiologically? What are some of the symptoms? And then how can you, in the moment, realize that you are getting a little triggered by XYZ so that you can, just like Alyssa said, take that moment, kick that up into the brain, be body aware at the same time that you're kind of raising your consciousness about what is happening. So that metacognition piece. And so we're always encouraging them to say, okay, now when this particular, like the sweaty palms or whatever it is, and in fact, we have a nice discussion around when it happens to you, what does it look like? What does it feel like? How is the energy moving in your body, right? Really that kinesthetic piece where they can then say, we got to pop up into the mental role. That's my cue. I need to go into my brain about this and start using some of the mitigative techniques that, like even just simple things like breath work. And then also little tricks of the trade for focused listening when you're starting to feel a little extra nervous and going, oh, am I going to lose my cool here? Or am I going to shut down? How do I stay open? And how do I stay curious? But at the same time, realizing that you have the right to set boundaries and step away from things if you need to.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I know I may be overdoing it with the clips, but
Well, and it's their voices, I think, that really tell the story of the efficacy of what we're doing.
yeah. So let's listen to this clip from Chloe. I think it spotlights sort of this idea of humility and learning.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it was how similar our beliefs were, even though I'm religious and my partner was not, but we still had a lot of the same thoughts about religion and how that shaped our thought process. Because I thought, like, oh, we can't be that similar if, you know, they think this way and I think that way, but I was completely wrong about that.
You know, and you can sort of provide any insights you wanted to that, but for me, that kind of brought out kind of what made me think about is like if you could think about how this method maybe helps unlock those kind of moments.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a couple layers to it because some of the initial, if you kind of look at it as an onion peeling off layers, when I think about in particular Chloe's journey, which she has shared very openly about, the first year that we did this, she kind of ran away literally from the office door. So you have to first deal with just the fear of conversation, just the fear of having that. Uh, because a lot of the initial wave of where they're going has to be that introspective piece about the elements of that public speaking, let's call it, that we do in our day-to-day lives. Those conversations that can be just difficult because we're fearful of how we're going to be perceived. Those internal kind of thinking monologues that we all can have, right? And so once they're able to evolve and sort of get a little more, I like the word grit, a little more grit about that and adaptability in themselves, then what they're able to do is start really thinking about what intellectual humility looks like. So we don't hit them over the head with a lot of heavy, like, this is the critical thinking skills that are involved in this. But as we know, evidence kind of thinking, which evidence-based thinking will lead to curiosity questions typically, and then intellectual humility. These are some gateway critical thinking skills that allow an individual to pop up when they're having those physiological symptoms, like we were talking about earlier, to kind of pop up into the meta and become a little more self-regulatory. And with that goal then of deepening their confidence in maintaining intellectual humility. Like I said, we don't hit them over the head with that, but that's really a lot of what's happening is that it becomes the art of no matter what kind of civic professional situation you're in, you can remain through that kind of curiosity, perspective taking, intellectually humble so that you can learn and you can grow and ideally from there perhaps do some more concrete bridging that could lead to solutions oriented thinking. And I think for our criminal justice majors, they hit the nail on the head pretty potently in some of their self-reflections about why this is so, and again, when you think of criminal justice, that's more life and death potential situations, right? Hopefully not so much in teaching and in these other fields, right? But so the profundity of what I think they had to say about as criminal justice majors going out into that world in this era really struck home. And quite frankly, sometimes when I sit back and I think about it, it brings me to tears with a degree of pride that these young people are going to be out there doing this work for us.
Yeah, it's a good point because we have to remember that a lot of us kind of have the privilege of having a nuanced or, nuanced view about things. And sometimes in those roles, it's like somebody's got to make a call.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think Abby had a real constructive piece there to say about that in terms of, illustrating that idea.
Learning thick skin, you can be 100% right and be talking to someone who's 100% wrong and thinks they're 100% right. And there comes a time where you just accept it. And that's the most sure thing to do. And if you can't do that, don't go into a people profession. And if you can't handle your temper, if you can't handle someone thinking you're wrong or throwing insults at you, don't go into a people profession, especially not law enforcement.
Again, I keep using the word grit, but I think it's really a lot of what We want our students to feel empowered, that they can stand on their own 2 feet as much as any person can, and we explain to them, this is not a panacea. You're going to mess up. You are going to have those days where you're off and maybe you're hangry. You just had to have your Snickers bar, and you might make that mistake. And let's hope that it's not going to be career breaking for you, because I think that's the unfairness of our era. A lot of young people going into these jobs, this is not political for them. They want to help their communities. They want to teach young people. They want to, help families that are dealing with difficult situations. They don't get into it because they have a political axe to grind. They want to make money doing something that they feel they're giving back to their communities on. And it's a disservice when we hyper-politicize these professions, because it can become a discouraging thing for young people, and very fear-making, that if I go into this field, what's going to happen to me if, right, somebody decides to make this a political thing? Maybe I had a slip of the tongue, or maybe just taking something I said out of context, whatever. We're all vulnerable in this day and age to that, unfortunately, in ways that we never could have imagined, certainly, David, when you and I were young.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's hear from Alyssa, and I think this speaks a little bit to how media narratives shape our perceptions.
I learned that I really shouldn't judge a book by its cover. Given my partner's profession, my immediate thought was, you're a conservative and you're hateful, because that is what the media likes to show about that particular profession. And I learned that that is far from the truth. He is the most kind and gentle person I have ever met in my entire life. And it just really opened my eyes to what really just being worldly means. Because, of course, being on media, you know that there's an algorithm, and what you like and what you interact with kind of shapes what you see. And being so willing to be open-minded and kind of step out of your comfort zone to learn more about people that are different than you and the people that are around you is so important, because your mindset can start to get really jaded, and a lot of the times that can become really dangerous because that's all you're seeing. And it was just so eye-opening. So eye-opening.
We all know we're lacking nuance in our era in terms of public discourse, and encouraging them to lean into their, like I said, their curiosity and willingness to work with nuance. They crave it. Their minds are eager for it. It's exactly what their brains developmentally, when you think lifespan development will be doing at this point anyway. So how do you kind of amplify that and make that an experience where they can have these potent interactions? And in talking to some of the people who were their dyad partners, it's exactly what they said, that just seeing there's, in this case, mostly they came at it from an age-related perspective, but sort of busting down their own perceptions of younger people was what I felt most of them seemed to lean into, like, wow, that the nuance of thought in these younger people was more sophisticated, et cetera, et cetera. And again, nobody's a monolith or whatever speaks for a generation, but it helps nuance even the thoughts of older generations towards younger generations as well.
Yeah. I was thinking something similar with the idea of, I know, and you can sort of tell me if I got all this wrong, but I know some experts have told me, things like that, these kind of ideas of we can sort of become, some of those stereotypical patterns can come in because of our prior trauma. Right. I think some of the students that I heard even mentioned that, like, oh, this was difficult because I had a challenging conversation before, and I sort of now assume everybody that wears that color hat or whatever looks like, is like that. Now, is that another thing where it's not necessarily something that you beat the students over the head with, but it kind of comes out in the program?
Yeah, I mean, we don't dive heavily into those elements of things. It is kept more focused on the work world than their interpersonal. And of course, there are always resources that we can point students to if there is a need for that. And I think what happens is through the process, we all want to be aware of our biases, right? And our traumas can lead to, having predisposed positions, right? And in particular, when you think about, and we all can do this, we can all think about our traumas. There are deep-seated kinds of reactions that we'll have to people based on less conscious cues. So for example, you might, especially when you're younger, whatever, you might have gone into a class or a social experience, and there's somebody that looks like your grand Aunt Gertrude, man, and she was always nasty and she was always this, and you start to take an immediate dislike of that person. And it really kind of works in that level of just raising your own self-awareness, again, of those mental dialogues, like some of the students already mentioned, that, oh, wait, I'm probably, yeah, she reminds me of my Aunt Gertrude. I better be careful so I don't treat her as if she's my Aunt Gertrude. You know what I'm saying? And so it's same way with this person might be a minister. So I'm not going to just assume because I've had negative experiences, right? So it's an empathy piece. I know that nowadays that word gets bantered around a lot in negative ways and politicized ways too. But let's face it, empathy is a real life skill, and we can look at it that way without dressing it up as some sort of big issue in society that, oh, it's bad to think about empathy or it's good, overly good to think about, it's just a skill. And so getting students to employ that when is needed as well. And a degree of self-empathy has to be built through this process, which that we see a lot of that in that fall semester when they're challenging some of their own fears about public speaking, when they're, trying to work through, okay, they design it together. I lead a dialogue that then allows them to design this. Of course, we have a lot of years of experience doing this now, so it does kind of flow out more easily as time has gone on. But this has been a co-inventive process. Every semester, it is the students and us as a team developing out. So they have significant amount of input and they have to reconcile differences of opinion through this process. So it allows them to kind of cut their teeth a little bit on that. And then when they're ready for step 2, that civic diplomacy semester, you can see that it builds up that self-reflective piece that, again, perspective taking becomes the goal.
Right. And becoming comfortable with that too. I mean, that's not something we get that much practice with.
Right on.
So let's hear from Alyssa speaking specifically to sort of generational bridging.
I think what was personally eye-opening about my conversation was we're a part of different generations, but talking about the time that he grew up versus the time that I grew up, I realized that there really wasn't that much different about us. For instance, he was able to run the streets of the neighborhood and come back not too long before the streetlights came on, and despite the world that we live in today, it's kind of similarly, we go to play dates and spend summers, weeks with our friends. I could name countless times that I've done that. And it was really eye-opening because I always had trouble talking to somebody older than me because it's always been so hostile because of the differences that we share and just a lack of understanding. So it was really like a breath of fresh air.
And we've talked about it a little bit already, but I don't know if you want to add anything to how, the program, maybe help students soften some of those kinds of preconceptions.
Yeah, I think it's in the power of strategic question asking. And again, I've said this many times about curiosity, but in the fall semester, we asked them to think deeply about the experiences of the veterans that they're going to be hosting this dialogue with. And they do get to know the veterans to some various degrees. We're not always able to connect deeply with each of the panelists, but just in realizing that if you go beyond the obvious questions of difference and you ask other types of curiosity questions about a person's past, about their experiences, their perceptions, without necessarily going right to that thing that denotes difference, and even when the differences are percolating up, how can you ask questions that kind of reground into the lived experience of the person, not just the ideas that they hold, but the lived experiences that shaped and molded them to their now, to their point of the now, where you're interfacing with them. And in that element seems to then carry, like I said, seems to carry over pretty well in terms of then where they go in that deeper dive of the second semester dyad practice with the different folks. And of course, the other piece too, and I think a couple of the students mentioned this as well, you're going to have to talk to supervisors. You're going to have to learn how to advocate for yourself with your boss, with older colleagues, and to not feel like just because the way they may approach something is automatically confrontational, those to lean into the pauses, to lean into those spaces where you can reflect and then reapproach, or if it's in the moment, do a redirect to something that is going to bridge whatever differences are sort of being highlighted in that moment. And again, it's an art. There's science behind all of this, but the actual execution of this is the art of living, right? It's so it's that kind of and allowing them also to realize that it's okay to stumble. It's okay to stumble over your speech. It's okay to say, oops, I don't think that came out quite the way I want to ask that. Let me rephrase that. Or, can I ask a different question out of curiosity? Using that kind of bridging, and I don't mean that in the literal bridgy sense, but like just literally the rhetorical bridging, allows the students to re-anchor, refocus, and hopefully self-advocate, because we know that a lot of where students do struggle, like in college, for example, is they often don't know the questions asked. That's that, but they often won't go the next step, is like even approaching an older adult and saying, I don't even know the questions to ask. Can you assist? Right. And that is just so, once a student gets that they can just come up and say, I don't even know what I'm not supposed to know, or what I'm supposed, you know what I mean? And that becomes that opening, and knowing that they can do that, and it's not the end of the world, and it's okay to stumble, and it's okay to kind of have that struggle, easing into that, not holding yourself to such high perfectionist standards, which our modern society absolutely is hyper perfectionist. We need to break through that. That's partially what we're also trying to do, is don't be a hyper perfectionist. Life is too sloppy, and you will live a life of misery if you try to be perfect in all things, right? And so, yeah, so trying to also just somewhat, do that coaching work that a little bit of life experience can also bring to the experience of what we do with the students.
Good enough is good enough.
Yeah, sometimes it really is,
Yeah. So are there plans, like where do you go from here? Are there plans to try to extend this or broaden it out?
Well, I mean, in the ideal, yeah. One of the things that we just enjoy doing it. So mostly this is our now that we can affect. This is the sphere of influence we have. But as I mentioned earlier, we are open to community college students from around the country if they are so interested. And I'm doing some things within my college and some of the administration who really believe in this project as well, to maybe offer other kinds of trainings to adults who would like, these are young adults, but older adults, people already on the job, where we can do some of this waging dialogue approach. But specifically to the Civics Corps, also working to sort of just get the word out, starting in Michigan to start. There's a lot of community colleges. We have a pretty rich community college network here. And, we're all looking for ways to expand out what we call co-curricular, the things that are not, they're tied to what you're learning in your classes, but it's not just about that. And it builds those bridges, those interdisciplinary bridges, relational bridges. And I'm hoping that at some point, maybe we can get a few more community colleges that will, they don't have to have an advisor there, nothing like that. All they have to do is say, hey, if you're looking for an experience, maybe advertise it, or, find a few students that they'd recommend to the process. So that's our goal, as time goes on, is to just continue to do that, but also to really amplify what we do with Veterans Speak. We've got a number of veterans organizations that are partnered with us on this. They help us find veterans from across the country. Students get to be part of that kind of process, which is really good. And just getting the word out that we're doing this as a celebration of and honoring of our veterans. And getting that word out more would be a priority. And we in particular, what I also think makes us a little different is that we honor the Merchant Marine. We are partnered with American Merchant Marine veterans in our work, and that has been something that the students have really taken as a cause. For people who are listening who don't know, the United States Merchant Marine veterans from World War II had a long struggle to get their veteran status, which really early on was intended for them and then never happened. And in 1988, they got that. And in 2000, they got the Congressional Gold Medal of Honor. And my students, I think a lot of young people like the underdog story, if you will, and these folks not being properly recognized throughout history of course, our Merchant Marine, they function in peace and war. They're incredibly important to everything that we have going on. But that war side sacrifices that these generations made matter, and they should be honored for that. And so my students have kind of taken that on a little bit more. We incorporate the Merchant Marine into the work that we do on those panels to make sure that there's an integrated perspective about the nature of sacrifice and service. And then also they've taken on the cause of trying to encourage reaching out to state representatives, a side little project that we did this year, where they are encouraging that legislation be reintroduced. It had been previously introduced to give Vietnam era Merchant Marine veterans their veteran status. And so in addition to all the stuff that I just got done talking about, they took this on because they felt there was a need to advocate for these men and women that were never recognized during, especially during Vietnam, although we would hope for Korea as well. And as anybody who knows that history, the Merchant Marine was incredibly important to what happened in Vietnam. I mean, whether we agree with the war or disagree with it, that it mattered to the lives of the people who were on the ground there. And so they're trying to get that historically rectified, and encouraging representatives to take up that legislation again.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, I really love, sort of the how pragmatic and practical this program is, and how it accommodates, the realities of community college students. I really can't commend this enough. So thank you so much, June Klees, for making time for our show.
And thank the students, right? They're just amazing. So thank you, David. Really appreciate it.
That is it for this episode of the Outrage Overload podcast. For links to everything we talked about on this episode, go to outrageoverload.net. If something in this episode sparked a thought, or maybe even lit a fire, I'd love to hear from you. You can leave a voice message or even schedule a quick one-on-one chat right from our contact page at outrageoverload.net/contact. If you found this episode valuable, please share it or leave a review. It really helps. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.